She looked me dead in the eye and said it like she was commenting on the weather. My family thinks you're a step down from Preston. I just don't want any awkwardness at the party. That's all. No apology. No stumbling over the words. Just that flat, matter-of-fact delivery, like she was telling me the forecast called for rain, and I should probably grab an umbrella on my way out. I was standing in our kitchen, the kitchen I paid for, in the house I bought, in the Nashville neighborhood she had personally picked out, and my wife of 4 years had just informed me that her family considered me inferior to her ex-boyfriend. And the reason she was sharing this wasn't guilt, wasn't shame, it was logistics. She didn't want awkwardness at her brother's birthday party. I said, "Understood." 2 syllables. That's all she got from me. She waited. I think she expected something more. A question maybe, an argument, a plea. Some version of, "What do you mean?" "I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I've built a career from nothing. I love you. How is that lesser?" She wanted a reaction she could manage, a conversation she'd already rehearsed answers for. What she got instead was a man who had just made a very quiet, very permanent decision. I said, "You go enjoy the party." She left 2 hours later, dressed in the outfit her mother had picked out for her, carrying the wine she'd bought for her brother's celebration. She kissed me on the cheek at the door. She actually kissed me on the cheek. By the time she pulled out of the driveway, I was already on the phone. And by the time she pulled back in that night, there was nothing left of me in that house but the furniture, and the letter I'd left on the kitchen counter, right next to the coffee maker she'd given me for Christmas. My name is Ellison Carr. I'm 43 years old. I'm an orthopedic surgeon at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee. I have repaired shattered bones, reconstructed knees for professional athletes, and spent 17 years building a practice that has given me a life I am genuinely proud of. And I spent 4 of those years married to a woman who smiled to my face and apparently apologized for me behind my back. This is what happened when I finally stopped trying to understand it and just walked away. If this story is hitting something you recognize, I want you to hit that subscribe button right now and leave a comment below. Tell me what you felt in that first moment when someone you loved showed you who they really were. I read every single one. And if you know somebody who needs to hear that walking away isn't weakness, share this video with them. The like button takes 2 seconds, and it helps this channel reach more people who need these stories. Now let's get into it. I need to go back to the beginning, because the beginning matters. Not in the way people usually mean when they say that, not in the love story sense, but because the beginning is where I missed all the signs, and I was a trained diagnostician. I spent my entire professional life reading symptoms, connecting patterns, catching things other people overlooked. I did it every day for patients. I missed every single one when it came to Darcy. We met at a charity gala at the Country Music Hall of Fame. That's a real Nashville experience, by the way. Suits and Stetson hats and open bars at $800 a plate. I was there with a colleague from the hospital who'd bought a table. Darcy was there with a group of women from her marketing firm. She was the one at the table who wasn't performing. Everyone else was slightly on, slightly aware of being seen. Darcy was just talking, laughing at something her friends said and not checking to see who noticed. I noticed. We talked for 2 hours that night. She was from Brentwood. That's the wealthy suburb south of Nashville, the kind of place where the subdivision names have words like estates and reserve in them, and the lawns are professionally landscaped year-round. Her father, Randall, ran a commercial real estate development company. Her mother, Lynette, sat on 3 nonprofit boards and chaired 2 of them. Her older brother, Garrett, was in the family business. And her ex, Preston, was someone I didn't hear about until our 3rd date, and even then, only briefly. Preston Wexford. His family had been in Tennessee for 4 generations. Old money in the way that old money works in the South, not flashy, but present. His grandfather had been a state senator. His father was in banking. Darcy mentioned him the way you mention a chapter of a book you've already read. We dated for 2 years. It ran its course, we're fine. I filed it away and moved on. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I was charmed. Genuinely charmed. Darcy was smart. She ran the accounts for 3 major brands at her firm, managed campaigns with budgets that would make most people's eyes water. She was funny in that dry way I've always liked, the kind of humor that doesn't announce itself. She asked me questions about my work that weren't polite filler. She wanted to know what it felt like to do the first procedure after a long case went wrong. She wanted to know what patients said when they took their first steps after a major reconstruction. She made me feel like what I did actually mattered to her. I was 40 years old. I had been divorced once before. A short marriage in my early 30s that ended without children and without bitterness. Just two people who'd grown in different directions. And I was not looking for anything serious. And then I was. We dated for 14 months. I proposed at the base of Chimney Rock over in western North Carolina on a weekend trip in October, when the leaves were doing that thing they do in the mountains. She cried. Real tears, not performed ones. I was sure of it. We got married the following spring at a venue in the Tennessee countryside, rolling green hills and white tents, and 200 people who seemed genuinely happy to be there. Her parents were warm to me that day. Randall shook my hand and said I was a good man. Lynette hugged me and called me son. I thought I had arrived at something solid. Before I get into what went wrong, I want to tell you something about what was right, because it was real. For at least the first 2 years of that marriage, what Darcy and I had was genuinely good. We worked well as a team. We traveled, a long weekend in Charleston, a week in Costa Rica, a road trip up through Virginia in the fall. We had the kind of conversations that go until 2 in the morning without either person noticing the time. She came to my hospital's charity gala and charmed every surgeon in the room. I attended 3 of her company's events and smiled through all of them, even when the marketing world small talk made my eyes glaze over, because she mattered to me and her world mattered because of that. I want to say this because I think it's important to acknowledge that you can be inside something genuine and still be heading somewhere bad. The two things are not mutually exclusive. Love is not armor against a situation that is slowly being decided without you. The cracks were subtle at first, and I want to be honest about that. I want to be honest because I think a lot of people who've been through something like this spend years asking themselves, how did I not see it? And the truth is that you don't see it because you're not looking for it. You're inside a life you chose. You're trusting the person you married. The first thing I noticed, and I didn't call it a crack at the time, I called it a quirk, was that Darcy rarely mentioned me to her family unprompted. When we had dinner at her parents' house in Brentwood, the conversation moved around me like water around a stone. Randall would talk business. Lynette would talk about the renovation they were doing on the lake house in Norris. Garrett would talk about whatever deal he was working. And Darcy would participate in all of it, naturally, comfortably, and I would sit there and eat the beautifully prepared meal and contribute when there was an obvious opening, and otherwise just be present. At first, I thought this was how their family operated. Some families are just like that. Insular. Not unfriendly, just complete unto themselves. But then I started noticing something specific. Preston's name came up at those dinners. Not frequently, not in a pointed way. Just naturally, the way you mention someone who is part of the fabric of a place. Preston's mother was at the gala. Preston's firm just bought that building downtown. Oh, Garrett ran into Preston at the club last week. Every single time there was a small silence after the name. Like everyone was subtly checking to see how I'd respond. And every single time I gave them nothing to work with. I'd nod, or I'd say something neutral, and the conversation would move on. But the name kept coming up, and Darcy never redirected it. She'd never say, "Can we not?" or "Let's not talk about him." She'd just let it sit in the room with us. The second thing I noticed was that Darcy handled our social calendar differently depending on the crowd. When we were with my colleagues, other surgeons, residents, hospital administrators, she was engaged and present and proud. She'd tell people what I did with a warmth that felt real. But when we were with her family's circle, the Brentwood people, the country club crowd, the Wexford adjacent social orbit, something in her posture shifted. Not dramatically, just slightly. A little more careful, a little more edited. I told myself she was just code switching, the way everyone does in different social environments. I told myself a lot of things. The third thing I noticed was the comparison, and this one I cannot believe I let slide as long as I did. It started small. Preston always sent flowers on the first day of a new job, said to no one in particular, while Darcy was texting at the kitchen counter. Preston's family had a tradition of taking a trip together every fall, said wistfully during a conversation about holiday plans. Not weaponized, not mean, just dropped into the air like it had no weight. I brought it up once, about 8 months into the marriage. I said calmly that I'd noticed Preston's name came up a lot in certain contexts, and I wanted to understand what that meant. Darcy looked at me with genuine surprise. She said she didn't realize she was doing it. She said it didn't mean anything. She said her family had known Preston for a long time, and he was just part of their world, the same way an old neighborhood is part of your world even after you move away. I accepted that. I shouldn't have. But I did. The party invitation, or the lack of one, came on a Thursday. Garrett was turning 35. He'd planned something at his house in Green Hills, which is one of Nashville's nicest neighborhoods, the kind of place where the streets curve and the houses sit back from the road behind mature oak trees. A dinner party, maybe 40 people, close friends and family. I found out about it when I overheard Darcy on the phone with her mother, talking about what she was going to wear. This was a Wednesday night. The party was Saturday. At dinner I mentioned it. I said something light. Sounds like Garrett's party is this weekend. Are we doing anything before? Darcy set down her fork. That small pause. The kind that only lasts a second, but carries a full conversation inside it. She said, I was going to talk to you about that. I waited. She said, my family is just... They have a complicated history with certain things, and Preston is going to be there, and I just think it might be easier if you didn't come this time. I don't want any awkwardness. I said, what kind of awkwardness? And that's when she said it. The words that I've replayed more times than I can count since that night. She didn't stumble on them. She didn't whisper them. She just said them, the way you say something you've been carrying around and finally got tired of holding. My family thinks you're a step down from Preston. I just don't want any awkwardness at the party. The kitchen was very quiet after that. I could hear the refrigerator humming. I could hear a car moving slowly down our street outside. I could hear myself breathing, steady and even, the way I breathe in a complicated surgery when I need my hands to be still. I said, understood. She seemed almost relieved. Like the hard part was over. Like she'd been bracing for a fight and was grateful I wasn't going to give her one. She said, I knew you'd get it. You're always so rational about things. I said, you go enjoy the party. And then I sat there at that kitchen table for a long time after she went upstairs to start planning her outfit, and I thought about what she had just told me. Not that her family didn't like me. People's families don't always like the people their children marry. That's ordinary. That's human. What she had told me was something different. She had told me that she had been carrying this assessment, that I was a step down, and she had not contested it. She hadn't told me that she'd argued with her family on my behalf. She hadn't said they're wrong, and I've told them so. She'd said she didn't want awkwardness, which meant she had accepted their judgment, which meant that somewhere, in some quiet corner of her, she agreed with it, or at least didn't disagree strongly enough to matter. 4 years of marriage. And the measure of a man in that household was whether he cleared a bar set by a man whose grandfather was a senator. I went upstairs. Darcy was in the bathroom. I took a shower in the guest bathroom, which I almost never did. I went to bed in the guest room, which I had never done. I lay there in the dark, and I made my decision. Friday. I was in the OR by 6:30 in the morning. 3 surgeries, back to back, the kind of day that doesn't allow you to be anything other than exactly present. Femoral reconstruction on a 60-year-old man who'd been in pain for years. A collegiate soccer player, 21 years old, ACL and meniscus. A woman in her 50s with a badly deteriorated hip who had been waiting 18 months for this appointment. When you're doing what I do, you cannot be anywhere else. You cannot be in your failing marriage. You cannot be thinking about dinner parties in Green Hills. You are in that body, fixing that specific thing, and when it goes right, there is nothing else in the world that feels like it. I finished my last surgery at 4:15. I showered in the attending lounge, changed into street clothes, drove home. Darcy was getting ready. She'd laid her outfit on the bed. I could see it through the bedroom doorway as I walked past. And she was at her vanity doing her makeup. She called out, There's leftover pasta in the fridge if you get hungry. Like that was sufficient. Like that was the appropriate thing to offer a man you'd told yesterday that his family considered him less than. I said, "Thanks." I went into my study and I called two people. The first was my attorney. Not a divorce attorney, not yet, but a friend who was a partner at a firm downtown and who I trusted completely. I told him in general terms what was happening and asked him what I needed to know before making any decisions. He talked to me for 30 minutes, calm and methodical, and when we hung up, I had a much clearer picture of where I stood. The second call was to my friend Waverly, who is a general contractor and one of the best people I know. I told him I needed a storage unit opened up and some help moving things quickly and quietly. Waverly didn't ask a single unnecessary question. He said, "Text me the address. I'll bring the truck." Darcy came to the doorway of my study to say goodbye around 7. She looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful. She said, "Don't wait up. These things usually run late." I said, "I won't." She left. Waverly was there 20 minutes later. We worked fast. I am not by nature a sentimental man when it comes to objects. I know what matters to me, and I took those things. My books. Not all of them, just the ones I'd had since medical school, the ones I'd carried from apartment to apartment through residency. The photograph of my parents that sat on the bookshelf in the study. The watch my father gave me when I matched into my surgical residency, a simple Tag Heuer, nothing extravagant, but the most important object I own. My clothes, my medical equipment, my laptop and the external drive with 17 years of financial records and professional documents on it. Everything I had brought into the marriage, I took out of it. Nothing that was ours, nothing that could be contested, nothing that would give anyone the ammunition to say I was taking something that wasn't mine. Waverly loaded the truck with the quiet efficiency of a man who has moved a lot of things in his life and understands that sometimes you just need to move. We did it in 2 hours. I texted the storage facility on James Robertson Parkway in East Nashville, and they had a unit ready. When the truck was empty and Waverly had gone, I walked through the house one final time. It still looked like our house. Her furniture, her artwork, the throw pillows she'd spent 3 weekends choosing. The kitchen where we'd had 1,000 ordinary meals. The living room where we'd watched television on Sunday evenings with nowhere we needed to be. The back porch where I used to sit on summer mornings with coffee before heading to the hospital, watching the light come up over the yard. I had loved this life. I want to say that clearly, because I think it's easy to assume that when someone walks away, they were never really in it. I was in it. I chose it. I fought for it in the quiet, daily way that you fight for a marriage, by showing up, by being present, by working to be the kind of partner that makes someone's life better. But you cannot fight for something on your own. And you cannot fight for something in a household where the battle was already decided before you walked in the door. I wrote the letter on a single sheet of paper, longhand, at the kitchen counter where this had all started. I did not write it in anger. I want to be very clear about that. I wrote it with the same steadiness I bring to everything that matters. Darcy, I have thought carefully about what you said last night. You told me that your family considers me lesser than your ex-husband, and that you didn't want to bring me to your brother's party to avoid awkwardness. You didn't tell me that they were wrong. You didn't tell me you'd defended me. You told me you wanted to avoid awkwardness, which means you have decided their judgment is something to manage rather than something to reject. I understand now that I have spent 4 years trying to earn a seat at a table that was never going to be offered to me on my own terms. I am not willing to spend the next 40 years doing the same. I hope you find what you're looking for. I genuinely mean that. Ellison. I left the letter next to the coffee maker. I left my house key on top of it. I drove to the short-term apartment I had booked that afternoon, a furnished unit in Germantown, the neighborhood just north of downtown Nashville, close enough to the hospital that I could walk in good weather. I sat on the edge of the bed in that empty apartment, and I did not feel like a man who had just destroyed his life. I felt like a man who had just been honest, for the first time in a long time, about what his life actually was. Her mother called at 11:14 that night. I know the time because I was still awake reading, and I saw Lynette's name come up on my phone. I almost didn't answer. And then I thought, no, I'll answer. Because whatever this is, I'd rather face it directly than leave it hanging. I said, "Hello, Lynette." There was a pause. Then, Ellison. Darcy just called me. She came home and you're not there. She said your things are gone. A beat. What happened? I said, I think you probably know what happened. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear voices in the background. The party, probably winding down. Or maybe Lynette had stepped outside to make this call. She said, Darcy told me what she said to you. I said, okay. She said, I want you to know that isn't how I feel about you. Randall and I have always thought very highly of you, Ellison. You're a good man. I said, I appreciate that, Lynette. And I meant it. Lynette had always been kind to me, in the way that certain people are kind. Not warmly, not personally, but correctly. I do need to ask you something, though. She said, all right. I said, has anyone in your family ever said, to Darcy or to anyone else, that they thought I wasn't good enough? That I was a step down from Preston? The pause this time was the longest of all. She didn't say yes, but she also didn't say no. What she said was, families have complicated feelings when, and I let her finish the sentence because I wanted to hear where she was going to land, and she said, when someone they love makes a choice that surprises them. I said, I see. She said, Ellison, please don't do anything permanent. Give Darcy a chance to explain. She loves you. I said, Lynette, I'm not angry at Darcy. I'm not angry at anyone. I just needed to be honest about what I could live with. I thanked her for calling. I told her I hoped the rest of the party was good. And I ended the call. My phone buzzed 12 more times that night. Darcy, texting. I read each one. The first 3 were variations of, where are you? Call me. The 4th was, I don't call me. The 4th was, I don't understand what happened. The 5th was, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. The 6th through 9th were more of the same. Apologies that were really explanations. Explanations that were really justifications. My family is just traditional. Preston has known them for years. It's not a fair comparison. I love you. That's what matters. The 10th was, this is an overreaction. The 11th was, please come home. The 12th was, I need you to call me. I didn't call. I turned off the light and I slept better than I had in months. Over the next week, I learned something important about myself. I am a person who processes by working. I went to the hospital every morning. I did my rounds. I saw my patients. I operated. And somewhere in the middle of that week, I realized that the heaviness I had been carrying for the last year or two, this low-level background sense of not quite being enough, not quite fitting, not quite landing, had lifted. I did not know until it was gone how much weight I had been carrying. Darcy reached out every day. First texts, then calls, then a long email that she'd clearly spent significant time writing. She talked about counseling. She talked about wanting to understand what went wrong. She talked about the ways she had failed me and the ways she was sorry. I read all of it. I want to say that because it matters. I didn't dismiss her. I didn't block her. I read every word she sent. But I noticed something in the reading that told me everything I needed to know. In none of it did she say, my family was wrong. She said she was sorry for how she'd communicated it. She said she should have handled it differently. She said she hadn't meant for it to hurt me. But she never said, they had no right to judge you that way. They were wrong. I should have told them that immediately, and I didn't, and I'm ashamed of that. That absence was an answer. Her father called me 12 days after I left. Randall is a businessman, and the call had the texture of a negotiation. He said he respected me. He said Darcy was devastated. He said families go through rough patches and he hoped I wouldn't make a permanent decision based on one difficult conversation. I said, Randall, I want to ask you a direct question. He said, all right. I said, do you think I'm a step down from Preston Wexford? He said, and I give him credit for this at least. He said, I think you're a different kind of man. I think our family has a certain kind of history with certain kinds of people, and Preston fit into that in a way that was comfortable and familiar. I said, that's not the same as no. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "No, I suppose it isn't." I thanked him for being honest. I told him I respected him for it, and I told him I thought this particular chapter was closed. Garrett reached out, which surprised me. We had never been particularly close. Pleasant at family events, nothing more. But he texted me about 3 weeks after everything happened, and his message was not what I expected. He said, "I want you to know that the party wasn't my idea. My mom and Darcy decided between themselves. I didn't know you weren't invited until that night, and I want you to know I said something to my mother about it because what happened wasn't right." I texted back, "I appreciate that, Garrett. I mean it." He replied, "She loves you, for what it's worth. She's just been trying to be two things at once for a long time, and she's never figured out how to put them in the right order." I thought about that for a long time. Two things at once. A wife who loved me. A daughter who needed her family's approval. And when the moment came that she had to choose which one came first, she chose the one that didn't cost her anything. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it as a fact, because it's the only honest way I know to look at it. The divorce was not clean, because divorces never are. But it was not dramatic either. We had a mediator. We had separate attorneys. We divided things fairly and without cruelty. The house went on the market, and it sold in 3 weeks. Nashville real estate does not sit still for long. We split the proceeds according to what each of us had contributed. Darcy cried at the final mediation session. Real tears. The same tears she'd cried when I proposed on that rocky overlook in October, with the leaves burning orange and red all around us. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't feeling anything, but because I had already done my grieving in those first weeks in the Germantown apartment. Quietly. Alone. The way I've always processed hard things. When it was done, I walked out of the mediator's office on Church Street in downtown Nashville into one of those February days that Nashville does occasionally. Cold enough to see your breath, but with a sky so blue it almost hurts. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and I felt the same thing I'd felt the night I left. Not relief exactly. Something quieter than that. The specific peace of a person who has finally stopped pretending. My colleague at the hospital, the one who'd invited me to the gala where I met Darcy, she asked me a few months later how I was doing. Not in the polite conversation way. In the real way, the way people ask when they actually want to know. I told her the truth. I said better than I expected. Honestly better. She said, "What do you miss?" I thought about it. "The idea of the life," I said, "not the life itself." She nodded like she understood. She has been married for 20 years to a man who clearly adores her, and I think she understood the distinction more deeply than I intended. There's a version of my marriage that existed in my head, the version I was building toward, the family holidays and the Sunday mornings and the years accumulating into something solid. I loved that version. I grieved that version. But the version that was actually happening, the dinners where I sat like a polite visitor, the name that kept appearing at the table like a ghost, the party I wasn't invited to, the assessment quietly accepted and never contested. That version I do not miss. Not for one day. Not for 1 hour. I want to say something to whoever is listening to this who recognizes something in this story. Maybe it's the comparisons. Maybe it's the family that never quite accepted you. Maybe it's the partner who loves you privately but can't defend you in public. Maybe it's the explanation that was meant to be reasonable but landed like a verdict. Here's what I know. Your worth is not determined by how you measure up to someone else's history. It is not set by the standards of a family that knew someone else first. It is not adjusted by how old the money is or how long the name has been in a county. I am an orthopedic surgeon. I repair the bones that let people walk, run, carry their children, live their lives. That is what I do. That is what I have built. And it took me too long to stop apologizing. Quietly, to myself, in the way you apologize when you accept someone else's framing, for the fact that I built it differently than certain people expected. You do not have to earn your place in a room by being someone else. You do not have to compete with a ghost. You do not have to stay in a house where the terms of your belonging have already been settled without your input. The moment Darcy told me her family considered me lesser, The choice she made was not about one party. It was about which version of herself was going to show up, which loyalty was going to take priority, which thing she was willing to defend. She made her choice. I respect it, even now, in the way you respect a decision that hurt you when you understand it was honestly made. And I made mine. I live in Germantown now, in a 2-bedroom apartment with windows that face west toward the Cumberland River. The sun goes down over that water in the evenings, in a way that is legitimately something. I eat where I want to eat. I work the hours my patients need. I have my friends, my colleagues, my routines, my life. Last fall, I took a week off for the first time in 4 years and drove through the Smoky Mountains by myself. I stayed in a cabin outside of Gatlinburg for 3 nights. I hiked the Alum Cave Trail and sat on a rock above the clouds and ate a granola bar and thought about nothing in particular for about an hour. It was the best week I can remember in recent years. I am not a man who has given up on love. I am a man who has gotten very clear on what it actually looks like, what it costs and what it offers, what it asks of you in public and not just in private. I am in no hurry. I have plenty of time. The last time I spoke to Darcy was 8 months after the divorce was finalized. She called me on a Sunday evening, a Tuesday evening actually, I remember because I was prepping charts for the next morning. She said she'd been thinking about calling for a while. She said she was sorry, not in the mediation way, not in the text at midnight way, quietly, plainly. I'm sorry for what I said and I'm sorry for what it meant. You deserved better. I said, thank you, Darcy. She said, I've been in therapy. I've been trying to understand how I could have loved you and still let that happen. I said, I think you loved me as much as you were able to at the time. I don't think you're a bad person. She said, that's more generous than I probably deserve. I said, maybe, but it's honest. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing in particular, how the house had sold, how work was going, the easy surface of 2 people who had shared a life and were figuring out how to hold that without being crushed by it. Before she hung up, she said, I hope you find what you're looking for. I almost laughed, not unkindly, just because I'd said almost exactly the same thing to her in the letter I'd left on the kitchen counter. I said, I think I already have. I'm finding it a little more every day. And that's true. That is simply, honestly, completely true. Okay, real talk for a second. What gets me about stories like Ellison's isn't the dinner party or the mother-in-law drama. It's how long good people stay quiet about being disrespected because they don't want to make it a thing. And honestly, I get it. Nobody wants to be the difficult one. But there's a difference between being patient and slowly agreeing to be treated like less. The second you catch yourself managing someone else's comfort with your own pain, that's the moment to pay attention. You don't need a dramatic exit to have self-respect. Sometimes it's just quietly deciding you're done. Anyway, let me know down in the comments if you've ever had a moment like that understood moment where you just knew. And if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe because we've got a lot more of these coming. See you in the next one.